Hey guys, welcome back to episode 16 of Building a Family Business here on Builder Funnel Radio. As usual, I have Brooks and Wes with me. How's it going, guys?
Great. Yeah.
Good. Wes, I know you've been reading a pretty interesting book. What are you reading right now?
Yeah, it's one I would definitely recommend to our 4 listeners. Called The Perfectionist by Simon Winchester. And
I think we're at 5 now. Actually.
Oh, we're at 5. Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's called, I'm talking. It's called The Perfectionist: How Precision Engineers Created the Modern World. And so I think, for us that have been in the building trades and things like that, it's a pretty interesting book because it talks about the development of how do we measure things and how do you do things exactly the same way over and over and over again. And it talks about the development of the steam engine and interchangeable parts on guns. And so it's really a fascinating book, just how did we get to a standardized screw? When you think about it, you go down to Home Depot and go down to the screw area and go through and you pick up Brooks, don't you? So you're just happy to make some comment.
You had a lot of options there.
We're not going to take any of those. So anyway, but just the number of threads in an inch and all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, I highly recommend the book. It's really good.
Brooks.
I think Brooks should say something right now.
Brooks, do you have any thoughts on that?
Thanks, Vince. Actually, I did have a pretty good thought in that home building, remodeling, construction, one of the last things that is really hand-built in front of people.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is something you perform where people will walk by the construction site and just stare at what you're doing. I mean, where else does that happen? You don't go to the factory and watch people assemble things anymore, but there's something that you actually are building, assembling in an environment where people expect everything to be exactly the same. And, we're in typically an uncontrolled environment. So it's it sounds like a great book about how are you creating things that are very consistent in a very inconsistent construction cycle, construction environment. You're working outside, you're working in the rain, you have all different types of humidity, things that are just uncontrollable. And the building business, has made a lot of attempts to try to factory build homes and ship them out. And that never seems to quite work. So that sounds like a great book.
Yeah, it really is interesting. And the way he divides up the book is each chapter is another step in the progression towards more precision. So that's pretty interesting. Chapter 1, we get it within 1/10 of an inch, and that was very precise. So interesting. Yeah. And Brooks, your comment about hand building a house, your factory is there at the job site.
Yeah.
Henry Ford, when he first started building cars, he experimented with a lot of different ways to build a car and get a lot of throughput and how do you do it accurately. And that was one of the ways, which was the car stays in one spot and people come to the car and build it, or people hand them tools and they put it all together and then it's done, kind of like we would do a house.
Right.
And that was discovered to be, not nearly as efficient as having a line of people have the house or the car, move past you on a line. And of course, we can't do that with houses, but you could do it with manufactured houses, I guess.
I think they can, and that's why the houses are split in half and they build one side and the other side, they put them together. Funny story, I was riding my bike by a job site the other day and the guys were framing, and there was a guy up on the second floor calling down to the guy cutting, and he's like, yeah, leave the line, burn the line, right inside the line.
Yeah, right.
So they're within a 30-second or a blade width. I mean, that's a term, we'll just make it within a blade width. I'm like,
yeah.
So it's still very, kind of organic.
Yeah. When you think what's a blade width, it's what, 1/10 of an inch, or, who knows?
Just get it within a blade width.
Yeah. So not all that precise, right?
Mm-hmm. How thick's your pencil when you make the mark?
Right.
Yeah,
I was thinking about that the
fair.
other day when I was using my scale, I was thinking, which side of the line am I cutting on? Am I burning the line, because you want it
In the
as
line.
close as you can possibly get it. But once again, you're relying on an artisan or someone to do that. And this book really talks about the development of machines to build machines, because eventually the artisan
Can't do it.
can bring a lot to the table, but can't duplicate that precision. Just kind of like you used to say, well, I don't want something built on a Friday. I want something built on a Monday morning, because the artisan was tired on Friday versus fresh on Monday morning.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I do recommend it. And I'm going to read this next one in the series, which is The Men Who United the States, which is really about the transportation system and the development of the transportation system in our country. And I think that's going to be fascinating. He has a different perspective because he is British, but he lives in the U.S.
Yeah, that's great.
What do you think has been your biggest takeaway from this book so far on, kind of this goal in getting to perfection, or kind of narrowing that, I don't know, piece of error, distance of error you've got there?
I think my biggest takeaway so far really has been as to how quickly, relatively speaking, this has occurred.
Yeah.
So as several hundred years ago, you're still, well, probably a little bit more than a couple hundred years ago, but just like in the manufacture of guns, well, in the Civil War, no, I think it's the War of 1812. If you broke a trigger on your gun, you were done, because there was no box of triggers to go get a new trigger that fit right into your gun. You had to go find a
Turned
box.
around and ran.
Right. Well, and that's true. And that's exactly what happened, is that as people's weapons broke, they turned and ran, because they couldn't get their gun repaired, and they might not get it repaired for 4 or 5 or 6 days.
That's and that's when it would become a club. I mean,
Exactly right. Yeah, right.
Save your life. Yeah.
Anyway, but just it's amazing how quickly this has actually happened when you think about how long history is, man's history. To see this progress in such a short period of time to the iPhone, which is probably one of the most technically advanced little contraptions you could ever think of in terms of precision and accuracy.
You think about all the different things that are in an iPhone,
Yeah.
Right now.
Mechanically, electronically,
Flashlight, camera,
everything.
recording,
Right. Lenses.
Yeah.
Yeah. He has a whole chapter on lenses alone, which is very interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that speed of technology does start to make its way into building remodeling, because I know there is some pretty advanced technology, but it doesn't feel like it's hit mainstream all the way. A little bit slower adoption rate.
It's always been a struggle. I mean, we've been talking about, in our career, in Wes of my career, the smart house.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, back in the 80s, it was all about wiring. How are you going to wire everything? So, and we spent all this time where all these, where's the Cat 5 and the Cat 4 and the cable, and now you don't need any of it. We really worked really hard about where all that stuff was and how it worked. It's irrelevant.
I think it's certainly something it's important for us to all remember as we think about planning and looking out into the future, which is there'll be big jumps. It's not linear. And I think as human beings, we always like to think everything is linear. And so when we do our planning and projections, we just extrapolate out. And that's really not the way any of this happens. It might happen for a short period of time, but then there's some quantum jump, sideways, and things change.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I know today we were going to dive into a few do's and don'ts in terms of family business. Brooks, as you think back, are there any, maybe we'll start with the don'ts, sometimes that's always easier. Are there anything that stand out to you?
Yeah, so the key thing, and we see it happen a lot in family businesses, people will put family members on the payroll and they're not working. So that's definitely a don't. If people are working in the business, that's fine, but don't just be putting people on the payroll for no reason, because it just creates problems within the business, and it's also can give you trouble, at tax time too. So that's definitely a don't. Wes, what do you think?
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I'd say another one too is just don't play favorites. So don't play favorites either with family members, or I guess the converse would be uh, you a family member is an unfavorite because you're being much harder on them than you would be on a regular employee. So an even hand across the board, whether it's a family member or non-family member.
Yeah, and don't use, don't bring family disputes into the workplace. I mean, that's always a
Sure.
challenge.
Right.
Uh, things that could have happened 30 years ago in some family environment, and they get dragged into the workplace and it could be between siblings who had some just, maybe have never got home. And
It could be as simple as, the employees that show up at work and the husband and wife who run the company, which many of our companies are husband and wife teams, and they're upset about something that has nothing to do with the business, and they bring it right into the office, and everyone's walking on eggshells for the rest of the day or the week or whatever. And does not help productivity at your company.
And that's a good point, which is probably one of the biggest challenges. Yeah, if you have a husband and wife team and things are not going well at the office or not going well at home, how any marital disputes can really destroy a business. And so, the quicker you can move through those things and try to have the business survive, the better. But yeah, you can say, Wes, husband and wife come in, they're arguing. That's really detrimental to the business.
Yeah. So I guess if you take that one step further, if you feel like your relationship is on rocky ground to begin with, I wouldn't then start a business with that.
No. And you can't. Another don't is you can't give family members a free pass because they're family members. That's right. Another big don't, which they have to be treated equitably the same way you would other employees, which is really hard
to maintain that balance.
Maintain that balance, yeah. I mean, especially if you're a parent and one of your children works in the business, I mean, it's so hard to be like, oh, do I have my boss hat on, my mom or dad hat on? That's rough.
Yeah. For sure. Because if you might know the background of what's going on with that particular person, because it is a family member.
Well, sure.
But you kind of have to set that aside because you certainly don't have all that background info about the other folks that work for you. And you just have to keep it pretty straightforward. And
right. The other thing is, don't just use handshakes. If you got to deal with a family member, it's got to be documented just like you would with anybody else. It's sure you can work all the details out maybe much more amicably and easier with a dialogue than you might be with someone that's not a family member. But at the end of the day, sit down and write all that down, even if it's just a memo of understanding, because it's just amazing how people forget.
You create your own history, right?
Oh yeah, Heather and I would have this challenge where we would say, okay, well, this is how I remember it, and this is how I remember it. And like, were we in this? And it was close, but there'd be some stuff we wouldn't. So we would just always write everything down. And we did that in the business with Todd and Julie, and when the four of us were working together, we just sit down and say, okay, here's what everybody's remembering from this conversation, and we'd have some conversation, make a decision, and something you think, oh, we'll walk out of here, we're all going to remember that. No one remembers it.
I think that happens a lot because the way your memory works is the mind actually fleshes most everything, and it just maintains certain hooks.
Right.
And so it remembers the hooks, and then it rebuilds everything to connect the hooks. So, you're going to remember 4 or 5 little instances out of that particular situation. Someone else will remember 4 or 5 different little instances, and then everyone's mind rebuilds the rest of the picture differently. It's like when someone, no, that fence was red. No, I'm pretty sure it was blue,
But I think that's don't use a handshake for that, but for any sort of just, agreement. But it does bring up another key point, which is if you're having business meetings, we call them steering meetings in our company, we still have them, and you have your agenda, you have some things you're talking about and discussing, you're making a decision, you're saying, hey, we're going to park that, and when this comes up in a month, we're going to revisit it. We write down what everybody is understanding of what we're going to revisit, we'll pull that out in a month, and we're all sitting there going, what? You know, and then I'm like, well, here's, because I take the notes. I'm like, okay, here's what we wrote down. Here's what we all said. Yeah, that's fine. And we'll sit there and go, man, okay, well, there you go. But it does give you a place to start from and continue to move forward versus a whole half-hour discussion about, I don't remember it that way, you know. And so that's been helpful, is to, you know, is to do that. Write it down, even if it's simple, you know. Hey, we're going to make a decision in a month about this, and here's the things that are important. And we bring that back out. Okay, here's what we said. Okay, now let's, you know, make that decision. That's
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I think another one too is don't commingle your personal and business expenses. So, you know, I think that's a big temptation for small business, either because they don't have the accounting controls, but you always want to make sure that you draw a super distinct line between what are my personal expenses and what are my family expenses, separate accounts, separate accounting. Otherwise, you can end up in have some big tax issues.
Well, you have some tax issues, and you also have trouble understanding what does it cost me to run my personal household, and what does it cost me to run my business. And you'll see that when businesses go to sell and business valuation companies are like, okay, well, let's peel out all the personal expenses that are related to you being an owner of this company versus just running the company. And
Right.
I mean, there's definitely there's some things that were allowed through tax policy and through, you know, business accounting policy that are allowed, that are beneficial for, you know, owners. But there are some things that are not allowed. So you have to just be careful of what's allowed or not allowed. So guess the dog left.
Dog left, yeah. He was tired of your monologue there. Yeah.
My monologues do go on and on. So let me dig deeper into that.
Yeah. Well, is that why you also mentioned the thing about just putting people on payroll if they're not active in the business? Because then it's not giving you that true representation of your P&L and all those types of things.
And there are ways you can put family members and have them on the payroll if they are doing work. I mean, it's very, you know, it's like, oh, okay, well, I've got a kid in high school and I need the office cleaned. I'll put them on the payroll to clean the office, and they do the work and they get some, you know, benefits, but they're physically doing the work versus just.
That's legitimate.
Yeah, that's
a legitimate.
Yeah. I was trying to show an example between, you know.
But you don't want to do it. Just, you know, you can imagine the effect that has on the other employees, if they see a child or an uncle or cousin or, you know, who's getting paid or is getting paid and not doing very much, and that's very debilitating to everybody else on the team.
Yeah, and it is a hot button for the IRS. You know, they're always looking, if you're in an audit, they're looking to see, is everybody who's on this payroll fully employed? And, you know, family members will be suspect.
Yeah. So better have a job description.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. They're doing something.
Yeah. Have your handbook, have your job descriptions written down, and
be fine.
Really help. Yeah, that's perfect. I'd also say don't let your business consume your family life, which is pretty easy to do. And I think in retrospect, all of us who've been in family business for a long time, you can look at different times in your life where it became all consuming. And so, you know, the rest of the family life maybe suffered for a while. And that's probably going to happen to a certain extent at different points, but you don't want that to be an ongoing thing. So really try to leave the business at the business when you get home.
That's a good one. Yeah. And you will, as an entrepreneur, go through those cycles, but you've got to be able to break that cycle at some point and say, okay, this has gone on long enough where it's negatively impacting or draining, you know, family time. Have you guys found a way to identify that? Because sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you almost don't feel it because you're just doing it. You're reacting. You're doing what you feel like you need to do to survive, or, you know.
I think it's good if you have a spouse or a partner who understands what's going on in the business, or maybe they work in the business as well. and you can talk about it and have some ground rules around it. Say, hey, I need you to call me out if I'm letting this drag me down, or, so you can each support each other to keep the family on a more even keel. I think that's pretty helpful. Now, if it's just, I think too, with your partner, if that's your spouse, you do have to set some ground rules or have some sort of a code, because one person may go, man, I really want to talk about what's going on at work this evening. And the other person's going, that is the last thing I want to do. I don't want to talk about this anymore. So if you can't get away from your work because you're living with your partner, then you need to kind of talk your way through that. And maybe you both want to talk about it, but some nights if you don't, you got to have some way of saying, not going to talk about it.
A fun way, or not a fun way, but a way Heather and I came up with that is that we would just have a time like, hey, and I would say, hey, can we meet on this work topic at this point in the day?
Mm-hmm.
And we were both working in the business. So that's one way to do it during the work day. And you say, hey, can we just take a half an hour during the work day? And I really need to talk about these things so I can get some perspective or get some help. And that can bleed into home too, but you can also do the same thing, which is, hey, could we talk for a half an hour after breakfast about this so I could get your feedback? Because really for me, it was always looking for feedback about, hey, what do you think about this? What's your input? How would you approach this? So that's what I was, that's what I was looking for. I didn't want to just talk about it. I was really wanting to get that feedback from Heather. And so I would just set a time and she'd be like, great. And we sit down, I'd have her full attention, and that works great. Because she really didn't want to talk about it at 6 a.m. when we're taking a walk.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, that's a miserable walk for an hour.
Yeah, I wanted to get out and enjoy nature, and all of a sudden we're talking about this vendor who hasn't paid us. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. What are we going to do about this? Yeah. It's like, well, I just wanted to enjoy nature here for a little bit. And now we're just talking about the.
I think you can do too is just from communication front is, Karen will say to me, well, I just want to say this, but I don't want you to solve this for me. I just want to say this and talk about, that's all I'm doing here. Please don't hop in with a solution for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. Because, if you're a solutions oriented person, then, typically you want to help somebody out and, oh yeah, you could do this, and this. Well, didn't really.
But that's a good question. I mean, is trying to work on your listening skills, which is asking that question ahead of time, which is, do you want me just to listen, or do you want me to provide feedback, and that helps you. Then you can be like, okay, I'll dial it for me. I'll dial it back, and someone's just going to talk. I'm like, yeah, that sounds interesting.
Yeah. Sounds really rough. Yeah. I get it. Yeah. I understand.
I'm fighting my tongue off here with my 20 great ideas. Like
we could solve this instantly. Yeah. Well, yeah. How about on the flip side? These are, I feel like, a lot of good things to not do, but there are some great things about family business and some opportunities, and we've gone through some of those. But are there any things that stand out to you as like you definitely need to take these steps or do these things within that family dynamic and environment?
Well, I think a key one is communicate or over communicate. And that can be on a host of topics, small or large. But definitely if you've got kids or other family members in the business who are younger, let them know what your plans are. I was thinking, I know a gentleman here in town, and his father had a very successful business. They made styrofoam forms, to put tools and things like that. And anyway, the son, the gentleman who I know, he worked in the business for a number of years, quite a few years. Dad showed up one day and said, hey, guess what? I sold the business.
Oh, man.
The son, oh, what am I, chopped liver?
So,
I think it probably took him a while to get over that. And that was just a total lack of communication.
Yeah.
Total lack.
Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe the father thought the son couldn't handle the business, or maybe he didn't want to do a workout, or, who knows? But they didn't talk about it.
Communication. Yeah, I mean, I guess that really you have to over communicate in those situations. So do over communicate, because if you don't, then there's just gonna be all these things. Well, I thought you were gonna do this, and it's like, well, I thought you were gonna do that, and you just
Yeah. So I think as a subset of that, I would say start with the end in mind.
yeah,
If you start your business, or if you haven't, if you're early on in your business, then what is the purpose of the business?
yeah,
And is this, I'm going to run this and then I'm going to sell it? Am I going to run this because I want to pass it on to my kids and I want them to run it? And, or am I just going to run it and build up some assets and shut it down? I
right.
mean, there's lots of different things and lots of different reasons people go into business. And so that is part of that communication, is being clear in your own mind as to what you're trying to accomplish. Doesn't mean it can't change, but at least I've thought it through.
Yeah, I think that goes also to do work on succession planning. I mean, do think about that. Think, like you said, Wes, which is, hey, what is, if you're going to build this business up and you're thinking you're going to pass it on in some way, then you need to think about that. I mean, only there's the statistic I pulled out. It's only 30% of family businesses survive to the second generation. Like 12% make it to the third.
Wow.
I think that's probably a higher number than really what really happens. It seems to me like very few ever make it to the third. So if you're thinking about succession, then you really have to get way out in front of it, especially if you have kids. And we were really clear with our kids when they were in grade school and junior high, and like, hey, this business is not going to be a business that you guys are going to go into. We'll have other assets, other real estate. We're going to, you'll be involved in different ways, but it's not going to be in the operational business of operating a home building company. So we were just super, super clear about that early on. So no expectations in that situation. Might be around some other stuff, but
Yeah, that's a good point. Just you usually don't think about those things when you first get going because there's so many other priorities, like getting sales and, figuring out systems and getting revenue in the door, those types of things. And so, but yeah, after even just a short period of time, once you're in the business and it's rolling, then that's probably a good time to start thinking about those things. And it may shift over time, what your priorities are, but I guess pairing both of your do's would be, do succession planning, but then do over communicating. If you're always communicating on how things are changing, then you're setting up for either success in transferring or not, but that was intentional, at least it sounds like.
And I think too, if you're, I think we've talked about this probably before, but if you do have multiple kids, you've got, more than one child, and that's where the communication really becomes imperative, especially if you have just one child that wants to be involved in the business and the other ones do or don't, or, even if the other kids don't want to be involved and one does, the other kids are probably thinking, yeah, I bet you that kid's getting a better deal than me. They're more favored, or who knows what they're thinking. But that's where as a parent and an owner, you can step in and say, hey, this is how this works, super transparent. This is how, everything is going to work out. And that can help a lot at, Thanksgiving.
And by the way, yeah, they're definitely getting a better deal. The other thing I was going to say is that
guess this is the dog show today.
It was. We must have a FedEx delivery or something.
That's Ranger for everyone that hasn't met him. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. But he obviously loves FedEx.
He does, yes.
He doesn't bark. He probably just bark at the Amazon Prime truck, I'm sure.
This is I love you so much I want to eat you, bark.
Yeah. Right, yeah. So I've already had breakfast. I'm going to have a second breakfast.
That's right.
Yeah. The other do, I think, is get lots of outside family input. So if you can put together your kitchen cabinet, so to speak, of who are those advisors that you value, and it could be formal or informal, but it's getting non-family members, and this is valuable even if it's just you and your business by yourself. I think, outside input from bankers, from vendors, from people you respect in the business community, and it could be just input from over lunch or breakfast or just coffee and it could be that informal, or it could be like, hey, could we get together once a month or once a quarter and get your feedback. And people are more than happy to do that, and that's super helpful. I guess it's like building. What do they call that when you get all the people together?
Mastermind group. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Oh yeah, the brain trust,
and we did that several times. We didn't consistently do it. I think over at least my time in business. But I did do it on a number of occasions, and I did find it helpful to get that input. Family members tend not to be as impartial,
right.
and people that are not involved in the business have a different perspective. They can see those big flaws that you are blind to, or that you really don't want to address.
Yeah, I find that outside perspective. I mean, people are able to just see things with fresh eyes, and yeah, you're just blind to it. Yeah, I've sat in on a few mastermind groups, and it's amazing. You'll watch somebody sitting there and they'll be running through everything, and then it's just like a flood of ideas from the other people, and they're going, oh, whoa, okay, yeah, I never thought about it that way. And so yeah, there's a couple of people I meet up with on a pretty regular basis, either monthly or quarterly, and yeah, just run through like challenges or different things, and yeah, one idea just kind of hits you over the head, and you're going, okay, so yeah, not always looking internally to family and feeling like all the answers have to come from there makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, anytime you can get with an outside group, we've talked about it before, whether it's through your industry that have some, we've talked about the Builder 20 program and the National Association of Home Builders, super valuable for our company. We just get lots of people that are very, very willing to share their experiences, which is super helpful.
Anything else in the do's don'ts category that standing out to you guys?
I just had one more, which is just be flexible, be willing to change your game plan. Don't be ultra rigid, and you do want to have a plan, but you got to flex. As we know, things change.
Absolutely. I think the other key thing, do set compensation rules.
Mm-hmm.
Do set compensation rules, because compensation is such a sensitive topic. So this is how we pay people regardless of family affiliation. This is how we pay our employees. And I think that's super critical.
Yeah, good point.
Cool. Well, hopefully this quick rapid fire list of do's and don'ts helped you guys. And I know Brooks and Wes, you guys have run into these things either once or multiple times over the years. And yeah, hopefully it saves you a lot of headache down the road as you start thinking about some of these things. And feels like communicate and over communicate seem to be common themes. And I think it's just tough. You're always having to actively battle against that, to just keep sharing, keep talking. And it feels like that solves most problems. So thank you guys for listening. We appreciate it. And if you have ideas for the show, things you want us to talk about, go ahead and send a quick email over to radio@builderfunnel.com. And we will see you next week on Building a Family Business here on Builder Funnel Radio.